How long would he let that child go hungry? The question burned in Maya's mind as she watched the man, his pride a brittle shield, try to return the can of formula she had just purchased for him. This confrontation, this quiet explosion in the sterile brightness of a grocery store aisle, was merely the flashpoint of a long, simmering story. 20 minutes earlier, Maya Williams was comparing prices on bags of rice in aisle 7 when she saw him. Andrew Monroe, a man whose face had once graced the covers of business magazines, now stood frozen before the baby supplies. His gaze was fixed on a $26.50 price tag as if it were a line of incomprehensible code. His daughter, Ellie, no older than 4, sat quietly in a threadbare stroller, clutching a stained teddy bear with one button eye. Maya slipped behind a display of paper towels, feigning interest, but her attention was locked on the scene. She watched him pick up the can of formula, his hand trembling slightly, before placing it back on the shelf with a slow, defeated finality. His jaw was a knot of tension. His dignity was screaming louder than the hunger pangs his daughter must be feeling. Maya moved with purpose. Before he could turn, she grabbed an identical can from a different shelf, proceeded to the checkout, paid in cash, and slipped it into her tote bag. She wasn't seeking gratitude, but when she approached him near the exit and quietly offered him the bag, his reaction was a wall of ice. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice low and serrated, though his eyes betrayed that he knew precisely what she was doing. "I saw you," Maya said, her own voice soft but unyielding. "I figured the little one shouldn't have to wait." Andrew shook his head, his eyes darkening with a familiar, wounded arrogance. "I didn't ask for your charity." "And I didn't wait for you to ask," she countered, her calm beginning to fray. He pushed the bag back toward her. "I don't want your pity." "This isn't pity," Maya snapped, her voice rising unintentionally. "This is about a child who needs to eat." As if summoned by the tension, a third voice, slick with amusement, slid between them. "Well, well, if it isn't the fallen Titan and the Cassandra who called his doom." Both Maya and Andrew turned. Thomas Vexley leaned against the bakery display, a smirk playing on his lips as he held a bag of artisanal bread. His cashmere coat was a stark contrast to the discount store's linoleum floors. His mockery was even more out of place. "I never thought I'd see the two of you in a place like this," Thomas drawled, his eyes glinting. "I suppose the organic markets are a bit out of reach these days, Andy?" Andrew's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he remained silent. His silence was a deafening roar of shame and fury. "And Maya," Thomas clucked his tongue. "Still trying to save him? Some habits die hard." "You think this is a game?" Maya stepped forward, a fire igniting in her chest. "You destroyed that man's life, and you stroll around here like a king." Thomas let out a low, dismissive laugh. "I destroyed nothing. He handed me the keys to his kingdom. I simply walked through the door." The smirk never wavered. He moved closer, invading their space, and leaned in as if sharing a secret, but his words were loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "You know the most pathetic part, Maya? You told him I was a snake, and he still chose my venom over your loyalty." With a final sarcastic nod, Thomas turned and walked toward the automatic doors, deliberately bumping his shoulder into Maya as he passed. She stumbled back against a shopping cart, sending a cascade of canned goods clattering to the floor. A few people gasped. And then he was gone. Andrew moved instinctively, his hand reaching out to steady her. "Are you all right?" Maya righted herself, brushing off her coat. Her dignity, though bruised, was intact. "I'm fine," she muttered. Then, with renewed resolve, she added, "But I'm not walking away from you. Not like he did." Andrew's brow furrowed in confusion. Why are you doing any of this? You know why, Maya said, her voice softening. I worked in your house for 5 years. I watched your little girl take her first steps. I cleaned up after your wife's parties and cooked the meals you were too busy to eat. And yes, I told you the truth about Thomas when no one else dared. Andrew closed his eyes, the memory a fresh sting. She had warned him 3 years ago. She'd said the contracts were too clean, the promises too grand, the man too smooth. He had called her presumptuous, accused her of overstepping. He fired her on the spot. Now, he stood in a budget grocery store with nothing but his daughter and a pride that was starving them both. She left, he said abruptly, his voice barely a whisper. Maya blinked. Who? My wife. A month after the collapse. She said she couldn't stand the whispers, the pity, the failure. Maya's gaze shifted to Ellie, who was still silently clutching her one-eyed bear. She deserves better, Maya stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. I can't give her better, Andrew whispered back, his voice breaking. You can give her a meal, Maya replied, and for tonight, that's enough. She held out the bag one more time. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't demanding. This time, after a long, agonizing pause, Andrew took it. His fingers brushed against hers, a brief, electric contact. When he looked up, the shame was still there, but it was mingled with a fragile flicker of something else. Trust. Maya gave a single, firm nod. Tomorrow is another day. If you need help then, I'll be around. She turned to leave, and as she walked through the sliding doors, she heard Ellie's small voice pierce the heavy silence. Daddy, can we have milk now? Outside, the evening air was sharp. Maya zipped her jacket, took one last look at the store, and whispered to herself, let this be the last night she ever has to ask. And for the first time in a very long time, Andrew Monroe didn't feel entirely alone. The following morning was a canvas of gray, the light filtering weakly into the cramped apartment. Andrew sat at a wobbly kitchen table, a relic from a thrift store, staring into a mug of instant coffee. The grand marble island of his past life was a distant, painful memory. Across from him, Ellie sat perched on a stack of phone books atop a dining chair, happily sipping warm milk from a cartoon-themed cup. He hadn't slept. Maya's parting words had echoed through his mind all night. Let this be the last night she ever has to ask. It wasn't just the sentiment, it was the quiet ferocity with which she'd said it, a tone he remembered from the days she ran his household with an efficiency and insight his own wife had never possessed. Maya had been more than staff. She had been the steady, honest heartbeat of a home he had taken for granted. He watched Ellie hum a tuneless song to herself. Daddy, she said, her focus still on her cup. Are we going back to the loud house? Andrew blinked, pulled from his reverie. What do you mean, sweetie? The loud house with the shiny floors, she clarified. Mommy was always sad there. He swallowed a lump in his throat. The penthouse. Ellie had only been 2 when they lost everything. It was astonishing what fragments a child's mind held on to. No, baby, he said softly. We're not going back there. She simply nodded, her acceptance a small, sharp blade in his heart. By afternoon, he had settled her on the floor with a coloring book and a small plate of crackers. He then walked to the public library, which had become his de facto office. It offered free internet, blessed silence, and a warmth his apartment often lacked. He scrolled through job sites, his cursor hovering over positions he was wildly overqualified for, yet he knew his name was now a liability. Andrew Monroe, once a synonym for innovation, was now a cautionary tale. Every application he sent felt like shouting into a void. The rejections, when they came, were swift and impersonal. He couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas was still out there, pulling strings, ensuring every door remained bolted shut. He left the library as the afternoon waned, his hope dwindling with the light. On his way back, he cut through a small park, and there she was. Maya, sitting on a park bench, a steaming cup in her hands, her scarf wrapped snugly around her neck. She didn't look like his former housekeeper. She looked like a woman at peace with the world. Ellie was on the swings nearby, her laughter a bright, clear sound in the crisp air. As Andrew approached, Maya stood and gave Ellie a gentle push before turning to him. "Your neighbors said she was getting restless," she explained before he could ask. "I thought some fresh air would do her good." He nodded, a knot of gratitude and shame tightening in his chest. "Thank you." "She told me you were at work," Maya said, her gaze pointed. "Are you working, Andrew?" He looked away. "I'm trying." She gestured to the empty space on the bench. He sat, his posture stiff. "Remember the kitchen in the old house?" she asked after a moment. A ghost of a laugh escaped him. "Yes. You always had that jazz station playing." "And you always asked me to turn it off," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "You said it disrupted your genius." "I was an ass," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "You were stressed," she corrected gently. "And proud. You still are." He looked at her, surprised by the absence of bitterness in her voice. "Why, Maya? Why are you doing this?" She leaned back, her face tilted toward the weak sun. "Because someone helped me once, when I thought I didn't need it. When I was too proud to ask. I was wrong." Andrew remained quiet. "You weren't a bad man, Andrew," she continued, "just a blind one." And Thomas knew exactly how to exploit that. His jaw clenched at the mention of the name. "He's still out there, making sure I stay down." "I know," Maya said simply, "and I think it's time someone started fighting back." Andrew scoffed, a bitter sound. "And what are you going to do? Take him down from your laptop? Are you my guardian angel now?" "No," Maya said, her voice firm. "I'm just the one person who sees what you refuse to. He's still controlling you, Andrew. Not because he's powerful, but because you're letting your fear win." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. She stood up. "I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a partnership, a second chance. Let me help you." He stared at the cracked pavement, his fingers clenching and unclenching. "I fired you," he mumbled. "I humiliated you." "You did," Maya agreed, her tone even. "And now life is humiliating you in ways you never imagined. The universe has a strange way of balancing its books." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "How? How would this even work?" "You let me help with Ellie," Maya proposed. "A few hours a day. I have my cleaning clients. I'm not looking for a handout. But I can make sure she has a hot meal, gets to her preschool program. It would give you the time and space to actually fight back." He hesitated. "She's a good kid," Maya added softly. "She deserves more than crackers and a worried father." He swallowed hard. "Yes," he whispered. "She does." A long silence stretched between them, filled with the ghosts of their shared past. Then, slowly, Andrew gave a single, decisive nod. "All right," he said, "but no pity. This is a business arrangement." Maya's smile was small but genuine. "Of course. We'll start with dinner tonight." She walked toward the swings, and Ellie squealed with delight as Maya lifted her into her arms. Andrew watched them, his past colliding with his present in a way that felt less like a crash and more like a gentle alignment. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he didn't feel like he was drowning. He wasn't rising yet, but the water was no longer closing over his head. That evening, Maya arrived at the apartment with a casserole dish of shepherd's pie, still warm from her oven, and a bag containing a fresh salad and a carton of milk. She didn't knock. Andrew had left the door unlocked for her. That small act of trust felt more significant than any spoken apology. The apartment was tidy but barren, the furniture sparse and mismatched. A single, slightly crooked photograph of a baby Ellie hung on the wall, a relic from a life before the fall. Ellie was on the floor, surrounded by crayons and sheets of paper. She looked up, and her face broke into a wide grin. "Miss Maya?" Maya smiled back. "Hello, little artist." She placed the food on the small kitchen counter and knelt beside the girl. "What are you creating today?" "A castle," Ellie announced proudly. "For me and my daddy and my bear." "A very fine castle indeed," Maya said, her heart aching slightly. From the hallway, Andrew's voice emerged, tired but clear. "As long as that castle has a working kitchen." He appeared, wearing a clean shirt that looked like it had been ironed with more hope than skill. He still looked worn down, but the heavy cloak of defeat he usually wore seemed a little lighter. "I brought dinner," Maya said. He nodded, his gaze lingering on the casserole dish. "It smells familiar." "Funny," Maya replied, unpacking the salad. "You used to say my cooking smelled like ambition and garlic." A faint, sheepish smile touched Andrew's lips. "I was a different person then." Maya didn't need to respond. The bare walls and worn furniture spoke for her. They ate at the small table, Ellie chattering happily between bites, occasionally asking Maya to cut her food into smaller pieces. Andrew was mostly quiet, but he was present, listening, watching. Maya saw the way his eyes followed Ellie, the way he subtly flinched when she asked innocent, painful questions like, "Why don't we have a big yard anymore?" After dinner, while Andrew put Ellie to bed, Maya washed the few dishes in the small sink. She could hear the low murmur of his voice from the bedroom as he read a story, his tone gentle and slow. When he came back, he leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "She really adores you." "She's an easy child to love," Maya said, drying her hands on a towel. He hesitated, then spoke again. "When I fired you, you were the only one who told me the truth about Thomas. You saw him for what he was." Maya turned to face him. "And you chose not to listen." "No," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I didn't. I was arrogant. I thought loyalty meant never questioning." "Loyalty without honesty is just ego, Andrew." The words hung in the air, heavy but true. He didn't argue. "I lost everything," he said finally, his voice raw. "The company, the house, my wife, all because I trusted the wrong person and pushed away the one who had nothing to gain from telling me the truth." Maya crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. Thomas was a master manipulator. He could make poison look like a cure. Andrew looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate fire. "He's still doing it. He's keeping me from getting any work. I can feel him, like a shadow at my back." "Because he's controlling the story," Maya said. "He didn't just bankrupt you, he assassinated your character." Andrew let out a frustrated sigh. "So what am I supposed to do? Fight a ghost from a library computer with a negative bank balance?" "You start small," Maya said. "You build something he can't poison, something real." He scoffed. "Like what? A lemonade stand?" "Like a foundation," Maya said. "A foundation of truth." Andrew was silent for a long moment. "Why are you so invested in this?" She looked at him, and for the first time that evening, she let her own exhaustion show. Because I remember the man who once canceled $1 billion meeting to take his daughter to the zoo because she had a bad dream. I remember the man who knew the name of every person on his staff, right down to the night janitor. His expression softened. That man seems like a stranger to me now. Maybe, she said, but he's still in there, just buried under a mountain of regret. He didn't reply, but his silence felt different now, more like contemplation than defeat. Maya glanced at the clock on the wall. I should go. I have an early client tomorrow. I'll walk you out, Andrew said, grabbing a thin jacket from a hook by the door. Outside, the night was still and cold. Her old but reliable car was parked under a flickering streetlight. Before she got in, she turned to him. Are you ever going to tell Ellie what really happened? He looked away toward the distant city lights. One day, when I can offer her a story with a better ending. Maya nodded. Then it's time to start writing it. She got into her car and drove away, leaving Andrew standing on the sidewalk, his hands shoved in his pockets, his heart beating a little more steadily than it had in years. Back upstairs, the half-empty carton of milk sat on the counter like a silent promise. The following weeks fell into a fragile rhythm. Maya would arrive each morning at 7 a.m., a small container of hot oatmeal in hand. She'd help Ellie get ready for her preschool program, her calm presence a soothing balm on the apartment's anxious energy. Then, she and Andrew would sit at the kitchen table, nursing mugs of coffee while he scoured the internet for any opportunity, no matter how small. Some days they barely spoke. On others, they'd share quiet anecdotes, slowly rebuilding a bridge of trust over a chasm of past mistakes. One morning, Maya pushed a folded newspaper across the table. I know this man, she said, pointing to a photo in the business section. Marcus Thorne, an independent developer. I clean his office. He's looking for a consultant to help audit a new software system he's implementing. It's not glamorous, but it's a start. Andrew stared at the article as if it were a mirage. Why would he hire me? Because I'm going to recommend you, Maya said simply. I show up on time, I do excellent work, and I don't gossip. People like that trust my judgment. That afternoon, Andrew put on the one good suit he had left, the fabric a little worn but the press still sharp. The meeting with Thorne was brief and to the point. The older man was gruff, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. I don't care about the gossip rags, Monroe, Thorne said, cutting straight to the chase. I care about numbers. Maya says you're the best. Prove her right. When Andrew returned to the apartment, Maya was there, helping Ellie with a puzzle. She simply raised an eyebrow in question. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He's sending a contract. A genuine smile broke across Maya's face, but she said nothing, letting him have his moment. By the end of the week, Andrew had signed his first consulting contract in 2 years. The pay was a fraction of what he once made in an hour, but it felt like a fortune. That night, after Ellie was asleep, they sat on the small balcony, the city lights twinkling below. She doesn't ask about her mother much anymore, Andrew said quietly. Maya waited, listening. She just vanished, he continued after a moment. Packed her bags and said she couldn't be married to a failure. That I wasn't the man she fell in love with. Maya took a sip of her tea. Maybe you weren't. He turned to look at her, a flicker of the old defensiveness in his eyes. You never pull your punches, do you? No. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. You know, Maya said, her voice soft, I used to feel invisible in your house, the person who cleaned the messes and served the food. But you saw me. even if you chose to ignore what I was saying." Andrew looked down at his hands. "I didn't forget, Maya. I was just too arrogant to listen." "Well," she said, her gaze steady, "you're listening now." The fragile peace was shattered the next morning. Andrew was walking Ellie back from the park when he saw it. A sleek, black sedan parked across from his building. It was an expensive, predatory vehicle that didn't belong in this neighborhood. And leaning against it, a cigarette held loosely between his fingers, was Thomas Vexley. Andrew froze, his hand tightening on Ellie's. "Go on up to the apartment, sweetie," he said, his voice strained. "I'll be right behind you." Ellie, sensing the tension, hurried up the steps. Thomas pushed himself off the car and approached, a wolfish grin on his face. "I have to admit, Andy, I'm impressed. I thought you'd be broken by now." "What do you want, Thomas?" "Just checking on my old friend," he said, the words dripping with insincerity. "I heard you're crawling back into the game. Consulting for old Thorne, is it? He's a small fish, Andrew. I could swallow him whole without even trying." Andrew's jaw was tight. "You don't scare me anymore." Thomas laughed, a cold, empty sound. "Oh, you should be scared. I dismantled your empire once. Don't think I can't crush this little sandcastle you're trying to build." He stepped closer. "You have nothing left, Andrew. Don't you get it?" "I have my daughter," Andrew said, his voice low and dangerous. Thomas's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, colder than before. "She's a sweet girl," he said softly. "It would be a shame if her father's ambitions put her in a difficult position." Andrew felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "You stay away from her." Thomas flicked his cigarette onto the pavement and crushed it under his shoe. "I warned you once, Andrew," he said, turning back to his car. "Some people are meant to be kings. Others are just footnotes in their stories." The car pulled away, leaving Andrew standing on the sidewalk, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. He didn't realize Maya was standing in the doorway until she spoke, her voice a low anchor in the storm. What did he want? Andrew walked past her into the apartment without a word and sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. Maya followed, closing the door behind them. In the other room, Ellie was talking to her bear. "He's not going to stop," Andrew said, his voice muffled. "He's never going to stop. And this time, he's threatening Ellie." Maya sat down across from him, her expression grim. "Then we don't just defend, Andrew. We attack." He looked up, his eyes wild. "How? With what?" She leaned forward, her voice a steel blade. "We expose him. We find every dirty secret, every hidden account, every lie he's ever told. And this time, you won't be fighting him alone." Andrew shook his head. "That's suicide, Maya. He'll destroy us." "So is living in fear," she countered. "So is letting him hold your daughter's future in his hands. It's time to choose, Andrew. Do we hide, or do we fight?" He stared at her for a long, silent moment, the fear warring with a desperate, rising hope. For 2 years, he had been running. Now, someone was offering him a reason to stand his ground. "All right," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but firm. "We fight." Maya nodded, a grim satisfaction in her eyes. "Good, because I kept copies of every financial report you ever threw out. Let's see what ghosts are hiding in the trash." For the first time, a flicker of Andrew's old, sharp intelligence returned to his eyes. War had been declared, but this time he had an ally. The storage unit was a metal box full of ghosts. Andrew's hand trembled as he slid the key into the rusted lock, the screech of metal on metal sounding like a protest from the past. Maya stood beside him, her arms crossed against the damp chill of the industrial park. "Last chance to turn back," Andrew muttered. "I didn't drive all the way to the forgotten end of New Jersey just to turn back," Maya said. "Open it." The heavy door rolled up with a groan, revealing a cavern of stacked boxes, shrouded furniture, and the stale scent of sealed memories. In a far corner, covered by a dusty tarp, was what they had come for: a set of old server towers, the physical backups from his company's system before everything had been migrated to the cloud. A move Thomas had championed. "There they are," Andrew breathed. For the next hour they worked in the dim light, sorting through the wreckage of his former life. Maya, methodical and focused, unearthed boxes of old contracts and personnel files, her eyes scanning for Thomas's signature. Andrew carefully disconnected the server towers, handling them like unexploded bombs. "This was our internal security system," he explained, his voice hushed. "It recorded everything, every meeting, every conversation in the executive wing. Thomas said it was obsolete, but I always kept a hard backup." "You think there's something on here he didn't want you to see?" Maya asked. "I think," Andrew said, placing the last tower into a protective case, "there's something on here he never imagined anyone would look for." Back at the apartment, they transformed the small living room into a makeshift command center. Andrew connected one of the towers to his laptop, the old system groaning to life with a pixelated startup screen. "This feels like archaeology," he murmured, his fingers flying across the keyboard, dredging up old passwords from the depths of his memory. "Let's hope you find a dinosaur," Maya replied, peering over his shoulder. They sifted through thousands of fragmented video files, a digital graveyard of meetings and presentations. Most of it was mundane. Then, Andrew found a folder labeled "Misc Audio Corrupted." Inside were dozens of audio-only files, accidentally recorded by the system's microphones without video. He clicked on one, dated 6 months before the collapse. The sound of 2 voices emerged from the speakers, distorted but clear enough. One was Thomas. The other belonged to a man Andrew recognized instantly: Marcus Thorne, the developer who had just given him a job. In the recording, Thomas was laughing. "Don't worry, Marcus. Monroe is so blinded by his own success, he'll never see the asset transfer. By the time he realizes the funds are gone, they'll be clean in 3 different offshore accounts, and the paper trail will lead right back to his own desk." Andrew's face went pale. He was in on it. Thorne. He was part of it. Maya felt a cold dread creep up her spine. The job, the recommendation. It had all been a setup. A way for Thomas to keep Andrew on a leash, to monitor him, to ensure he never got powerful enough to be a threat again. They kept digging, fueled by a new, colder fury. They found more audio files, more fragments of conversations, painting a devastating picture of a conspiracy far wider than Andrew had ever imagined. It wasn't just Thomas. It was a network of associates, all profiting from his downfall. "We need to find someone who was on the inside, someone who got screwed over by them, too," Andrew said, his mind racing. "Someone who would be willing to talk." Maya pulled out a notebook. "I remember a woman from the accounting department, Sarah Jenkins. She was let go a month before the collapse. Thomas always disliked her, said she was too meticulous." It took them 2 days to find her. Sarah was now working as a high school math teacher, having left the corporate world entirely. When they met her in a quiet coffee shop, she was hesitant, her eyes full of a fear that was years old. "They threatened me," she whispered, her hands shaking. "They said if I ever spoke about the irregularities I found, they'd ruin my husband's career." "We're not asking you to testify in court," Maya said gently. "We just need to know what you found." Sarah looked from Maya to Andrew. her gaze softening as she saw the desperation in his eyes. She finally nodded and slid a small flash drive across the table. "I made copies of everything," she said. "The offshore account numbers, the transfer logs, a shell corporation registered in Delaware. It's all there." Andrew took the drive as if it were a holy relic. "Thank you, Sarah. We won't forget this." That night, the apartment was electric with a tense, focused energy. They had it. The names, the numbers, the proof. It was a labyrinth of shell companies, illegal transfers, and laundered money, all orchestrated by Thomas, with accomplices like Thorne playing their parts. Andrew compiled everything into an encrypted file. "This is enough to go to the authorities," he said, his voice trembling with the weight of their discovery. "This is enough to burn them all to the ground." But before he could make the call, an envelope was slipped under their apartment door. There was no stamp, no address. Inside was a single glossy photograph. It was a picture of Maya, taken that morning as she walked Ellie to the park. On the back, a single sentence was written in sharp black ink. "Some ghosts should stay buried." Andrew stared at the photo, his blood running cold. He knows we have the evidence." Maya took the picture from his hand, her expression hardening into one of pure defiance. "This isn't a threat, Andrew," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "This is a confession. He's scared. For the first time in his life, Thomas Vexley is scared." She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had found earlier that week, the direct line for a tenacious investigative reporter at the New York Journal, a woman known for taking down powerful men. "Hello, Mrs. Davies," Maya said, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Maya Williams, and I have a story for you that's going to change everything." The war was no longer being fought in the shadows. It was about to go public. The article detonated like a bomb across the city's digital landscape just after dawn. It was brutal, meticulous, and backed by a cache of leaked documents that left no room for doubt. The headline was stark: "The Vexley Conspiracy: How a Tech Titan Was Betrayed and Framed." See, the reporter, a Pulitzer winner named Elena Davies, had woven the narrative with surgical precision, laying out the timeline of fraud, the network of shell corporations, and the damning audio clips. Thomas Vexley's name was plastered everywhere, alongside those of his accomplices, including Marcus Thorne. Andrew sat on the edge of his couch, the glow of his laptop illuminating a face etched with a mixture of terror and vindication. Ellie was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the hurricane that had just been unleashed. Maya stood by the window, her phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. "It's trending," she said, her voice a low hum of disbelief. "Vexley Conspiracy. They're calling for a federal investigation." Andrew could barely breathe. "He'll retaliate." "He already is," Maya said, turning her phone to show him. A rival news outlet, one known to be in Vexley's pocket, had already published a counter-story. "Disgraced CEO and bitter ex-employee fabricate smear campaign." It was a desperate, transparent attempt to muddy the waters, but the tide of public opinion was turning against Thomas with ferocious speed. Around noon, a call came from an unlisted number. "Is this Maya Williams?" a crisp official voice asked. "Speaking. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Diana Royce. We've seen the article in the Journal. A federal investigation into Thomas Vexley and his associates is being opened, effective immediately. We would like you and Mr. Monroe to come in for a formal statement." Maya's knuckles were white as she gripped the phone. "When?" "Now." The hours that followed were a blur of sterile offices, stern-faced agents, and endless questions. Andrew and Maya recounted everything. their stories aligning perfectly with the evidence Sarah Jenkins had provided and the documents Elena Davies had published. By the time they left the federal building, the sun was setting, and the world felt irrevocably different. "They believe us," Andrew said, his voice full of a wonder he hadn't felt in years. "They're moving on Thorn. They're freezing Vexley's assets." "This is just the beginning," Maya cautioned, but for the first time she allowed a flicker of hope to warm her features. That evening, however, the other shoe dropped. Maya was helping Ellie with her pajamas when there was a sharp, authoritative knock on the door. Andrew opened it to find two uniformed officers and a detective. "Andrew Monroe?" the detective asked. "Yes?" "You're under arrest." Andrew stared in disbelief. "For what?" "Suspicion of identity theft and wire fraud," the detective stated, his voice flat. "We have a signed confession." Maya rushed to the doorway, her heart pounding. "A confession? From who?" The detective looked at her, his expression unreadable. "From you, Ms. Williams." It was a masterstroke of desperate evil. Thomas, anticipating the federal investigation, had preemptively filed a police report. He had manufactured a confession, complete with a forged signature, claiming that Maya, a disgruntled former employee, had manipulated a vulnerable Andrew into helping her frame Vexley to extort money. He had twisted their fight for justice into a common crime, using their own story against them. As they led Andrew away in handcuffs, he looked back at Maya, his eyes a maelstrom of confusion and fear. "Maya, It's a lie, Andrew," she called after him, her voice cracking. "It's another one of his lies." But the door closed, and she was left alone in the apartment with a terrified little girl and the crushing weight of Vexley's counterattack. She was no longer a whistleblower, she was a suspect. The next 24 hours were the longest of Maya's life. With Andrew in a holding cell and her own name smeared as a criminal, she felt the walls closing in. But despair was a luxury she couldn't afford. She called Elena Davies, the reporter, and told her everything. She called Diana Royce, the AUSA, and pleaded with her to see the setup for what it was. Royce was sympathetic, but pragmatic. "The local police have a signed confession, Maya. My federal case is strong, but this complicates everything. It makes you an unreliable witness." "He's trying to discredit me before I can testify against him," Maya insisted. "I know," Royce said, "but we need more than your word against a forged document. We need something undeniable." Maya hung up, her mind racing. Undeniable. Thomas had built his empire on lies so intricate they looked like truth. How could she fight that? Then she remembered something from her time in the penthouse. A detail so small, so insignificant, she had almost forgotten it. Thomas was obsessively paranoid about his personal security. He had a private server in his home office, one he claimed was for family photos and personal files, separate from all his corporate hardware. He had once boasted that it was protected by a biometric scanner, his thumbprint. If he had manufactured the confession, if he had coordinated this frame-up, the digital trail wouldn't be on his company servers. It would be on that one. She knew it was a long shot, a desperate gamble. She had no authority, no warrant. But she had something else, the trust of the person who still had access to that penthouse. Andrew's ex-wife, Catherine. She had fled the scandal, but Maya knew she hadn't gone far. She had always been terrified of Vexley, a fear he had cultivated and exploited. Finding her took hours of calling old contacts, but Maya was relentless. When she finally got Catherine on the phone, her voice was thin and frightened. "What do you want, Maya?" "I need to get into the penthouse," Maya said, her voice low and urgent. I need to access Thomas's personal server. Are you insane? He'll kill me. He's already destroying us, Catherine, Maya countered. He's framed Andrew. He's framed me. He's using your ex-husband's downfall to build his throne. Are you going to let him? There was a long, tense silence. Then, Catherine whispered, the security codes were changed. But the master override, it's our anniversary date. He was always sentimental in the cruelest ways. An hour later, under the cover of darkness, Maya stood before the gleaming doors of the penthouse. Using the code Catherine had given her, she slipped inside the vast, silent apartment, a ghost in the opulent tomb of Andrew's past life. She found the office, the server humming quietly in a closet. The biometric scanner glowed red. She had no way to bypass it. Her heart sank. It was over. Then her eyes fell on a crystal glass sitting on the desk, a faint residue of amber liquid at the bottom. Thomas had been here recently, and on the side of the glass, clear as day, was a perfect, latent thumbprint. With shaking hands, she used a piece of clear tape from the desk drawer to lift the print, a technique she'd seen in a dozen crime shows. It was a ludicrously simple, almost stupid idea. But as she pressed the tape to the scanner, it flashed green. The server unlocked. For the next hour, she downloaded everything: emails, encrypted chats, financial models for the frame-up, and the original audio file of him dictating the forged confession to his lawyer. It was all there, the entire conspiracy, laid bare. She walked out of the penthouse just as the sun was beginning to rise, a single flash drive clutched in her hand. She didn't go to the police. She didn't go to the press. She walked directly to the federal courthouse and handed the drive to Diana Royce. The courtroom was a theater of silent, high-stakes drama. The air, thick with the scent of old paper and nervous sweat, crackled with anticipation. Andrew sat at the defendant's table, the last 2 days in a holding cell having carved new lines of exhaustion into his face. Beside him, Maya was a portrait of calm resolve, her presence a silent rebuke to the chaos Thomas Vexley had unleashed. Vexley himself sat with his legal team, a faint, confident smirk playing on his lips. He believed he had won. He had neutralized Andrew and discredited Maya, turning the state's key witness into a common criminal. The charges against him, he was certain, would soon collapse under the weight of her tainted testimony. AUSA Diana Royce stood to address the court. "Your Honor," she began, her voice ringing with a new, steely authority. "The prosecution would like to present new evidence, obtained legally and verified this morning, which pertains directly to the fabricated charges against Mr. Monroe and Ms. Williams, and provides undeniable proof of witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy on the part of the defendant, Mr. Vexley." Vexley's smirk vanished. His lawyers began to whisper furiously. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for zero tolerance for courtroom games, peered down from her bench. "Proceed, Ms. Royce." What followed was a systematic demolition. Royce played the audio file from Vexley's private server. His voice, unmistakable and arrogant, filled the courtroom as he dictated the false confession, instructing his lawyer on how to mimic Maya's phrasing. "Make her sound desperate," his recorded voice instructed. "A woman scorned. It's a narrative they'll believe." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Jurors exchanged shocked glances. Next, Royce displayed the emails, the encrypted chats, the digital blueprints of the entire frame-up. It was a stunning, irrefutable portrait of a man so assured of his own power that he never imagined he could be caught. Thomas Vexley sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief, turning slowly to pure, unadulterated rage. He had been undone not by a team of federal agents or a rival corporation, but by the one person he had dismissed as utterly insignificant: the housekeeper. When Royce was finished, a profound silence fell over the room. The judge looked at Vexley's lead attorney. "Do you have a response to this?" The lawyer, pale and visibly shaken, stood and stammered, Your Honor, we need a moment." "You've had your moment, counsel," the judge said, her voice cold as ice. "The charges against Mr. Monroe and Ms. Williams are hereby dismissed with prejudice. And Mr. Vexley," she said, turning her gaze directly on him, "you are to be remanded into custody immediately, pending a new expanded list of federal charges." The courtroom erupted. As marshals approached Vexley, he shot to his feet, his composure finally shattering. He pointed a trembling finger at Maya. "You!" he snarled, his voice a venomous hiss. "You were nothing." Maya met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The silent click of the handcuffs was her reply. Outside, on the courthouse steps, a mob of reporters swarmed them. The narrative had flipped completely. Andrew and Maya were no longer suspects. They were heroes. "Mr. Monroe, how does it feel?" one reporter shouted. Andrew looked not at the cameras, but at Maya. "It feels," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "like I can finally breathe." "Ms. Williams, what's next for you?" another asked. Maya thought for a moment. "For 2 years, we've been fighting a ghost from the past," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Now, it's time to build a future." They didn't stay for more questions. They pushed through the crowd and got into a waiting car, the city flashing by in a blur. They drove in silence until they reached the small, unassuming building where Ellie had been staying with a court-appointed caregiver. When Ellie saw them, she let out a cry of pure joy and launched herself into their arms. She hugged Andrew tightly, then turned and threw her arms around Maya's neck. "You came back," she whispered into Maya's shoulder. "I always will," Maya whispered back, her eyes closing as she held the child close. The final scene of their battle was not in a courtroom or a boardroom. It was months later, in a small, brightly lit office space above a row of shops. A simple sign on the door read, "Monroe and Williams Consulting." Inside, Andrew was at a whiteboard, sketching out a plan for a small nonprofit they were advising. Ellie sat at a child-sized table in the corner, happily drawing a castle with a crayon. Maya was at her desk, reviewing a financial statement, a small, peaceful smile on her face. They hadn't reclaimed the fortune Andrew had lost. They hadn't sought revenge. They had built something new, something smaller but infinitely stronger, founded not on ambition, but on trust. Andrew paused and looked over at Maya, their eyes meeting across the room. No words were needed. The quiet hum of their new life was a testament to the truth they had fought for. That true power wasn't about the empires you could build, but the integrity you refused to lose. And that sometimes the person who helps you find your way back is the one you once pushed away. The one who saw the real you all along. In a world of kings and titans, it was the quiet, unwavering strength of a woman they called the Help that had ultimately brought the kingdom of lies crashing down.